I'm Sydney Schreiber.
And I'm Harris Liggett. You're listening to Don't Dwell on It, the podcast where we pause just long enough to figure out what's really moving freight rail forward. Let's get into it. Real quick, just a refresh for the audience, because while this is the first episode, it's not our first episode, where we dove into a little bit about in your background. And I think you know quite a bit about rail, but I think you also know quite a bit more about trucks. Can you just kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so I started my whole career on the trucking side. So working at a brokerage, making sure goods get, transported from A to B, talking to truck drivers. And this was in the heyday prior to a lot of trucks having visibility. Mm-hmm. It was mostly, hey, where's my load? Let me call the driver.
Right.
The driver doesn't pick up. I don't know, unless wherever the last touch point was with that driver.
Right.
Maybe I can assume, kind of, but you don't know exactly where they are. And that was frustrating.
Yeah, and so it wasn't, I mean, in that scenario, it was a lack of visibility.
Yeah.
It was the fact that you couldn't plan for everything else.
Yeah.
And you weren't able to actually tell the customer, who was the one providing the money
Mm-hmm.
to move the things from A to B, where their shipment actually was.
Yeah.
Okay. At that, when that was your life, did you ever give thought to that challenge being similar maybe in air or ocean or rail?
Yeah, I think it was one of those things that, hey, if it's, happening on the trucking side, it's probably happening on the rail side, air, ocean, everything. But then I think about it, and I would go home from a long day of work, I'd order myself a pizza, and guess what I had with that pizza before it came? An ETA. Okay. I knew when that pizza was getting to my doorstep.
Okay. And as somebody from Long Island, high quality pizza really matters.
Really important.
Yeah,
the slices
okay.
are important. The
Right.
pies are important.
Right. Okay. So one of the things I think we've kind of been talking about is that rail has historically struggled to expose the visibility on its network, right?
Right.
It was a barrier or maybe an impediment in trucking, but that was addressed kind of in like 2015, 2017, 2019.
Yep.
Walk us through kind of what happened there.
Yeah, so I think what happened was, government mandates and regulations. So the mandates of ELDs basically forced all drivers to have a way to give us GPS. Exactly. So in the bed of the cab, ELDs.
Yeah.
So it made your life a lot easier instead of having to pick up the phone and, hey, where's the shipment? Where are you at? Are you going to make the delivery on time? I know automatically where you are, how long it's going to take to get there. I don't even need that extra phone call, that extra touch. It's all automated. But it was more so from all of the regulations that came from monitoring hours of service and all of that really kind of forced that hand.
Right. Yeah, one of the interesting things that I always thought about the regulation when it came out was the fact that as the rules were originally written, they applied to motor carriers that were traveling, I think, over a certain number of miles on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And so there's remarkably a large amount of the trucking community that actually just performs short hauls.
Yeah.
And I think we, obviously here in Chicago, see a lot of that where drayage drivers are moving containers and trailers from one facility to another facility, or typically maybe going from Canadian National to BNSF or Norfolk Southern to Union Pacific. And they don't have to have ELDs because they're not crossing that certain threshold. And so even though there were years and in a large amount of money that went into investing into visibility within trucks, and a lot of good benefits came out of that, especially from a safety and a transparency perspective. There's still like there's still a important facet of the market that technology has yet to even reach. Now that you've transitioned over to rail, like, how does rail visibility kind of measure up?
So I would say It feels like rail visibility is kind of back where truck was before all of the mandates. And the reason I say this is it's still really hard to know exactly where your car is at any given point in time.
Right.
What railroad is it on? Let me log into that site. Oh, wait, it's on to a different railroad. Let me log into that site. So I think that the visibility piece of it is lacking, and it's a struggle for a lot of people. Now, Harris, going back to your background, obviously you started in rail. What was it like for you as a yard master to know when trains were coming?
Totally different than what we experience on the outside.
Yeah.
Right. Because most of the time at the desk I would be sitting at, I had 4 screens around me.
Yeah.
2 of them probably being the dispatch. So I knew where the trains were. I was responsible for assigning those cars to those trains. And then as a result of that, the system would, as the trains were moving, would basically reassociate those cars with certain events. And so it was a really unique thing because I had full insight into everything that was going on the network. The challenge was always the gap in between what I would see in the yard or out on the line of road versus what maybe even headquarters would see. Because all they would see is maybe a screen that would have a representation of a train, and they would have some ping or a scan of the last time that rail car or locomotive passed a certain place on the railroad. And the interesting thing about that was I think it's really interesting for folks to understand this, but the way that I've always kind of like thought about the visibility network on the railroad is it's really nothing more than a grocery store checkout scanner. So if you and I go and we're at the store and we decide that we are going to recreate pizza, for example, and we're buying some ingredients, you inevitably scan it right across a barcode scanner, prints out in your receipt. That's you bought these things at this time. Effectively, the railroad network is set up that most rail cars, and even though some intermodal containers have them, but mostly it's intermodal cars and rail cars, have an RFID scanner or a tag that's placed on side them. They get renewed and recycled when the cars go in for maintenance, but it's a very foolproof system that's been around for a large amount of time. And every time they go past a scanner that's sitting beside the track, that is the indication of where that car was at that given time.
Yep.
So it's a great indicator of what was happening, awful predictor of what's going to happen in the future. And so oftentimes, I would find myself in the yard and we would be switching a train. And so the cars would go past a scanner departing the yard if we were stretching really far out and had to make a big move. And we would shove those cars back in the yard. And then inevitably we would have to kind of reconcile the 2 different events. Like the train actually didn't depart. That car actually is still physically here. And so at scale, doing that at my yard, your yard, everyone's yard, I mean, that's actually a really like big record keeping challenge. And so rail visibility exists on a fairly antiquated platform. It gets the job done.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge, and I think part of people have poked fun at me about lamenting, is that the piece around visibility, in my view, has effectively been solved. The challenge is that where you have to go to get that information and then begin to piece it together is actually, it's really hard to make a story from that. And once you create that story, it's really hard to actually digitize that into other workflows. So the things that you take for granted about being able to order a pizza and see it on an app and show up, right? Those things just, that infrastructure and workflows, they just don't exist in the North American rail network. It's 140,000 miles of track, 600 different railroads, and expecting all of them to be working across the same interoperable network. It's a fool's game. I mean, here we are in 2025 talking about problems that existed in the 1970s.
Yeah.
So I think when we think about visibility, it's a great stepping stone, but there are so many more things that you can do beyond that. And I think like one of the really interesting things is when we think about like pop culture, for example, back in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s, right? What did the majority of our families and parents do? They waited on the newspaper to show up to have access to information, right?
Yeah.
That was a morning routine that would happen at suburban homes, New York apartments, like wherever it was, like that. And then gradually, like news became more readily available, and now it is literally instantaneous. People turn on a cell phone and they are making news on any given basis.
Real time.
And the great thing about that is it's given us from a consumer perspective what it potentially could look like. The challenge is, and I think one of the things that we all face in society today is now we're at information overload. And so we've tried to figure out ways where we can compress that information through algorithms or platforms that allow us to consume it in a way that makes us feel good or allows us to do something with that information. And so I think that's one of the big challenges that I think the industry still faces, is that it's a legacy infrastructure that is trying to solve modern expectations, and those two things don't always kind of like go together.
There's a clash there.
Yeah.
Now, Harris, what are some maybe misconceptions that people may have about rail visibility?
I look at it on a spectrum, right? There are portions of, I think, the industry that would tell you rail visibility doesn't matter, right? They're just dots on a map. There are events that happened in the past, and there's nothing you can really kind of like do around that. And then you've got an entirely different version of the industry that is effectively saying we have 1.65 million rail cars in North America. Let's equip them all with telematics and GPS units to really kind of make use of that.
Yeah.
And, I think I don't disagree with either one of those viewpoints, because I think a certain segment of the population has really struggled to make use of visibility. Like, yes, you can tell me that the car departed a certain location at a certain time, but that in no way, shape, or form tells me when it's going to show up at my facility. And so I can sense that frustration. I know where they've been. I very much remember getting woken up as a train master from a customer that had a loading facility, and they were furious that they did not get updates overnight as to when this coal train was going to show up. And
there you were.
There
you
I
didn't
was.
know either.
I didn't know either. That is, I mean, it's 4 a.m. and
Yeah.
so I didn't really have a good answer for that. And so I feel that. On the other side, I think there is a belief that we can give more real-time information by attaching sensors to equipment. And so I look at one side of the conversation being very frustrated, and I think that there's potentially an opportunity to kind of solve that at more of like a network example. And I look at the entire like optimistic viewpoint of telematics that could eventually bring about some like really, really cool applications. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions about rail visibility is that it is being compared to other real-time visibility applications. And so the idea that for the majority of the trucking network in North America, you have ELDs that provide that real-time visibility. That's just, as I mentioned before, structurally, that's not how the rail network operates.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean it's foolish to pursue that idea or it's foolish to try to build on top of that, because that is fundamentally the building blocks. Like, we're in transportation, events matter.
Yeah.
It's what you do with those events to actually drive context, awareness, prediction, or additional workflows. That is what I think really matters in today's world. That is ultimately going to be the bridge between where we're at today and ultimately, I think, where everybody wants to be in the future, which is, candidly for us, like, really exciting.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because you can have perfect visibility. Let's say, truck has perfect visibility.
Yes.
But what do you do with that visibility?
Yeah.
That's really the question. It's not going to be the fix-all, because then you need to know what do you do with that information to empower your team, your people, to do something with that.
Right. Have you ever used the app FlightAware?
No, what is that?
Okay. So FlightAware, Flight Radar 24, they are very profitable businesses that have effectively taken open source information about airlines and airplanes and air traffic control. So they're effectively taking the transponders and the radars from all the available planes that are flying around, and you can visualize that. You understand where they are relative to their flight plan. You can predict when you think that they're going to arrive, if they're diverting. A lot of different things go into that. And I think one of the really interesting things is you're not the first person that I've asked that has never heard of it or doesn't use it. But if you think about it, right, that information would be super helpful of like, hey, like, when should I come pick you up from the airport?
Yeah.
Here's a link. Like, it'll give you all the context. And yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it's probably going to take you 20 to 30 minutes to get through baggage claim. if you check your bag. But
we don't all carry just a duffel, Harris.
That's
Come
right,
on.
That's right. That's right. So it's one of those things where that's a real world consumer application of this is why visibility matters. Like, you can actually begin to leverage that in a much more consumer fashion, which I think is candidly really exciting. I think the challenge is that same experience still has yet to reach into other modes of transportation, meaning it's really hard to work on that as a business. By the way, we are not sponsoring for FlightAware or Flight Radar 24.
So, Harris, you're the CEO of Telegraph. Tell me, how did you even get interested in building a software company that's foundation is visibility? Why is that so important to you?
Well, it definitely wasn't because I woke up one day and wanted to be CEO of a company. It was many years of seeing small flashes of a similar problem across multiple spaces. And so I think one of the really interesting, and so, this is life, right? Sometimes you are very intentional about what you want to learn and be exposed to. And I think a lot of people benefit from that. I mean, that's the great part about education. I think part of the thing is aggregating a lot of those experiences and then turning that into something useful. And oftentimes what shows up on a day-to-day basis, it isn't really well defined. And so when the mandates came out for ELDs around, it was like, I got this sense that this is something that we all should be paying attention to.
Yeah.
And so using that as an anchor point, looking back at different points of my rail career, I was really surprised at how much of the friction that I felt or customers felt when they were working with me at one of my prior railroads it was all around visibility. It was that they lacked the understanding of where was my rail car, where was my package trailer, where were these things. And it probably the best story that I have around it was working with a large paper and forest products customer at one of their facilities. And to just kind of paint the picture, this is in a part of the country that you would not anticipate there being a ton of trees, but it is in the middle of this beautiful forest. This town has been known for producing pulp and paper products for a very long time. And so we're physically there on site. We're trying to learn a lot about kind of what's going on, and had just kind of been working with that plant manager to really kind of understand how their supply chain kind of operation happened locally, because they were a point that was taking in raw materials of lumber and then producing those into finished goods, a lot of like particle board and other wood products. And anyhow, back, so we collectively are in this small town, and the sun is just beating down and it's hot as Hades, and seeing, I don't know, it was probably 8-10 center beams that were just sitting there. And we were doing some research and working with this client for a week. And so we had come every day and we saw the rail cars just sitting there. And so finally I asked the plant manager, hey, like, what is going on here? I mean, I know you were spending $200,000, $300,000 this week on flatbed trucks. Like, we know that is going on. Why are you not loading the center beams that are behind the facility, right? They're right there. Like, they are lined up and ready to go. You just need to forklift it over. Well, I called the train master at the class 1, and they said they were going to be here on Tuesday. They showed up on Wednesday. The short line didn't bring them to us until Sunday. And so we had to go ahead and plan our trucks for the week. And so our responsibility at the plant is to get our finished good out to the customer. And so that inefficiency was glaring right there. Not only did I feel it personally, getting woken up in the middle of the night by angry customers, but I felt it right there in that moment and knew that the time that I had been away from the railroad and that point in time where it was some years. And so realizing that not much had changed, it wasn't an indictment on the industry. It was an indictment on, this is a problem that impacts people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And it just felt like somebody should go try to figure that out. And that was where the whole concept of Telegraph was kind of born from, because if you can solve inbound visibility, if you can solve and you can address those questions, you allow people to be able to plan their facilities. And what does that really do? That means people actually understand the shifts that they're going to be able to work on any given day, because they know when this inbound supply of of materials is going to hit their door, or when they need to be available to load that out. And so when we think about, building software, yeah, I mean, visibility is cool and everything, but what are we doing on top of that? We're allowing people to save time and money. We're helping them maybe avoid demurrage. We're helping them understand how to balance the flow of maybe they're sourcing from multiple locations. Yeah, a lot of that stems directly from visibility. And so if you don't have that, it is a really frustrating place to work. And as a former railroader, it always pained me when I would be sitting with a shipper and hearing them say the same 30 things that I heard from the other 20 customers about why they don't allocate more money in their transportation budgets over to rail. So it felt like a really cool opportunity for us to kind of unlock and help people just use it more effectively. And the only way you do that is you've got to lower the barrier to entry, and you've got to make it easier to do. And so that was the whole thesis around like why we started with visibility and not really anywhere else kind of in the workflow.
Visibility is a foundation layer.
Right.
What else goes into that? What else is impactful? And what are some of the things that we should be thinking about?
Right. It's funny. I think we've worked together long enough to know that I always will go back to kind of a consumer example really quickly. And this is an application that I don't use. I actually found it.
We are not sponsored by them.
We are not sponsored, but I found it. I almost find it intrusive because it's like visibility to the max. So I don't know if you have ever heard of Life 360.
Oh,
right.
Yes. Okay, but for our listeners, what is Life 360?
Life 360. It is. I've never used it, so I'm kind of like reaching here. But it is an app that allows you to kind of share your location and set alerts around when you might be doing something. And so, let's just say, for example, you wanted to know if your dog was being taken on a walk, right? Maybe you attach like a sensor, or your dog walker like gives you that alert. And so those alerts are coming in on a regular basis. And so you're getting kind of this like interconnectivity and visibility into your day-to-day life or the lives of other people, which is a little odd. But be that as it may, I mean, that's like a very clear consumer application. So you're not waiting on an update from somebody, you're getting a notification that they've left for work, or maybe they're coming home, or maybe they were speeding, or whatever it was. And so Life 360 started out as that's their initial product, and I was actually reading their first quarter like earnings presentation, and I was just floored. I just could not imagine all the other business lines that they are getting into. And again, they are not sponsors of this podcast, but it just brought about like so many different ideas about like, so Life 360 is also going to get into insurance, and it's like that's a really interesting application. But when you think about visibility and car utilization and the number of miles that car might travel, then you can see other applications around maintenance or insurance or other things. And when you think about visibility, obviously, in order to move a car, you need to generate a way bill, or you need to understand your price, and you need to understand maybe how your entire network is performing. And so maybe you need to bring in some cameras, or you need some dwell analytics. You can do things like making best-in-class ETAs and providing people with like, hey, so we've given you a breadcrumb of data points. Now we're predicting based on your information or the information of many other shipments that look like yours or maybe moving on the same segment. And we're providing you with something that you can then utilize. And I think one of the biggest things we learned is access to data is meaningful. Access to useful data is actually what people want. And so I think one of the cool things like we've done, and kudos to the engineering team, is understanding how we can take those specific data points and those predictions and plug that in directly into customer workflows. And honestly, like that's been the most rewarding things, because when I think back to my experience, those are phone calls a train master's probably not getting, or those are emails that a customer service agent is not having to answer, or those are shifts that somebody isn't waiting around for something to show up, and maybe because they're trying to get overtime, they can better plan their week and when they're going to be home and enjoying themselves. And so I think just on visibility alone, that's a great piece of that. And I think one of the most frustrating things about when people talk about visibility as this magic elixir that it's going to solve everything, there's always an element of folks who come back and say like, well, just because you solve visibility, like it doesn't really mean anything. No, actually, like if you're running a facility and you need to know when a train is going to show up because you have 200 containers to ground, then you need to know, do I have chassis for those 200 containers? Like, you need to know all these other things. And so that is one of the areas where we got started, and it's something where we are super passionate about always improving on. Final thoughts on visibility. Wow, where do we go from here?
I mean, there's a million places to go when it comes to visibility. I think
there are a million things to see with visibility.
It doesn't matter where you go.
That's right. It matters what you can see.
Exactly.
That's right.
And so, Harris, we talked a lot about, trucking and where they're at when it comes to visibility and ETAs and tracking from an automation standpoint. What do you think is so different about rail?
Yeah, I think rail is really unique because it's a closed network that has existing infrastructure that's existed for so long, and so that's kind of been this base case, this standard offering, and candidly, like it's worked. I'm not going to say that it's worked well, but it's worked, and so as many of us know, there is oftentimes a bias towards good enough. I think what comes next is we got two kind of really interesting perspectives coming to bear. So one is really around the usefulness and application of telematics, which I can tell you, like we all understand, having GPS in your pocket, like it makes life easier in some ways. So it's far be it from us to say that it won't be helpful in the rail space. The challenge is that you have a cell phone, generally speaking, a lot of people have a cell phone. Not many rail cars have access to that. And so if you're a shipper that's managing a fleet of 30 rail cars, having some GPS equipment is useful for you. When you move up to 1,000, 1,500, 6,000, having 10 rail cars equipped with GPS, it's not even like, it's like that drop in the bucket dried up 5 minutes ago. It's just, it's not meaningful enough. And so I think that's kind of a journey that we are all on, is figuring out how we're going to get wide deployment of telematics and then extracting that data and making it useful alongside other data points, right? So I think that's one of the areas that we're going, and I mean, there are a ton of really exciting advances there. And the second thing is really around, is there an application for wayside cameras or cameras at different locations or satellite overflights that give you better understanding of how maybe the network is performing? So I think we tend to think about visibility as being very individualistic. This container, this trailer, this rail car. But when you're managing maybe a broader fleet, or maybe you're managing an entire network, like those are things you're going to have to take into account. And I think part of the challenge is there are 600 railroads in North America. They operate effectively together every single day. But the data transfer, I mean, expecting Norfolk Southern to share data with CSX, their competitor, it's kind of a foolish thing. And so I think that's one of the areas that I think the industry is going to struggle around. Is it's not data standards, it's data sharing that I think makes that very challenging. And candidly, like, the rail industry carries some very important but very hazardous materials. And so I think there is a bias towards having some caution around how the data sharing is being deployed. And so I think those are some areas that I think we just have to explore as an industry. We're going to get there.
We're going to get there. And when I think about visibility, I think about being a former operator, and I didn't care about the things that were going right. Those things keep going right. Out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
I cared about what was going wrong, and I needed to know.
Right.
And I think when it comes to visibility, knowing what are things that are needing intervention by me, by other operators, that's the important critical piece, because those are the proactive things that people are going to go chase down and fix and make sure, the car gets there.
Right.
Or the container gets there. And I think with visibility and with more enhanced, best-in-class ETAs, you're able to then have exceptions and then fit your workflow to be more exception management based versus, hey, I have 1,000 cars to track. Where do I begin? Maybe, I don't know, start with the 15 that are out of route.
Right. Or the 15 that have been dwelling on the belt for the past 7 days.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
I'm also excited for folks to really get to see kind of behind the scenes who we are, how we work, what we're about, how we think about the world, and doing that in a way that feels natural I think we're big communicators at Telegraph. And so one of the things I always appreciate about our team is just having more of that happen.
Yeah, I think having, transparent, candid conversations in this space, in this day and age, is important. And I think it's critical to, shift the industry into the new age that they're being pushed towards, and can't happen without having these types of conversations. So I'm really excited about it. Freight Rail does deserve a podcast.
Yeah, I don't know if I entered 2025 thinking that, but here we are. And I think one of the best things that you can do is just kind of like thinking about how Telegraph kind of came together. Like somebody has to do it. So let's just give it a shot. Let's see where it takes us. Yeah. So my name's Harris Ligon.
I'm Sydney Schreiber.
And thanks for watching Don't Dwell on It.
Stay tuned for more. Woo-hoo. Thanks for listening.
Next time, we're diving into the shipper's perspective with our Chief Growth Officer, Shahar Astor. Follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts and find us on LinkedIn to keep up with what we're building.